So that's great. How Procter and Gamble did that, and they obviously they
Your
put the,
idea that's great.
yeah. Well, that's great. It's they were scoundrels, but they got the benefit of it and of that wonderful show, and then they said to CBS, "We want to put it on," right?
Yeah, well, Jim Aubrey said the show is never going to make it. Show business background. He says the public doesn't like show business background. He says, why don't you make him a real estate salesman or maybe a life insurance salesman? And reinforced by the knowledge that they couldn't afford to offend Procter and Gamble, I in effect told Jim Aubrey to bug off, and he went on as a comedy writer for a television.
Which was such an intrinsically basic, wonderful part of that show, because that show, which is why my partner and I loved it and wanted to write for it, was that it was basically a totally character-driven show, and the only jokes were from the comedy writing people.
That's right.
Which is real life.
That's right, and from Maury Amsterdam's wise alecky attitude.
Yeah, yeah. The show was not successful its first year, was it?
Time spot.
Well, that's television.
No, it was not successful. As a matter of fact, Procter & Gamble canceled it at the end of its first year.
How'd you save it?
I provoked Lee Rich, who represented Procter & Gamble on behalf of the Benton and Bowles agency. I provoked him into getting me an appointment with Javier Havestad, the head of programming for Procter & Gamble. And I went back and I made a pitch to get them to continue the show. I did a real Al Jolson, down on one knee, and mammy, and whatever. They conditionally agreed to renew it for another season, but then they would only renew half of it, and then I had to go and get the other half, and successfully we got Lorillard, the tobacco company, tobacco people, to pick up the other half, and from that point on, we were making history with the show because it became a classic in the time spot which enabled the audiences to find it. Mm-hmm. It very soon became one of the top 5 shows on the air.
I'm going to be a little parenthetical here. I didn't mention it before, but I know that the Van Dyke Show ended up winning dozens of Emmys for writing, for acting, for producing, as well as your other show. Cumulatively, how many Emmy awards would you estimate that your shows, the ones that you won for your own directing and for your acting, and as well as those shows that you produced? There must be, how many? Dozens.
Oh, yeah, I was probably, we started with the Danny Thomas Show, which won Emmys for Danny and for me and for the production and so on. And from that point on, the Van Dyke Show collected a bundle, and Don Knotts and the other characters in the Andy Griffith Show got their share. Bill Cosby came down with quite a few, and
yeah, there's got to be it's got to be in the dozens, and there probably are scores of nominations.
Quite a lot of them,
yeah. Yeah, we'll have to find that out and make a plaque or something. In those days, when people look at the show today, they notice that Rob and Laura slept in single beds.
That was required.
Yeah. In other words, you weren't allowed to use a double bed.
No. Not only that, but the prohibitions and restrictions were so ridiculous that you began to lose all respect for the people who were making up these rules. Nowadays, of course, they've gone quite the other direction. You not only can use a double bed, but you can sleep on top of one another. But it's different in many respects.
Also, Mary probably made capri pants the most popular things. How did they react to that?
Oh, the network?
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember that they took it. Oh, they said something about the fact that, I forget the term they used, that they should not permit the pants to cup her buttocks or something. So, people, idiots do they get to make up these rules?
Oh, that's funny. You personally affected my life with coming up for the idea for a show. That was the first script that I wrote for the Van Dyke Show with Bill Persky. And it was the beginning of something that probably ended up in the casting of Bill Cosby in I Spy, and that was the show that we called That's My Boy.
That's My Boy, that's right. It was a very significant show in that respect. Oh boy. When I was doing the Danny Thomas Show, the reason I'm organizing it mentally is because it's quite a complicated subject. I'm trying to condense it into something tolerable for this thing we're doing. When I was doing the Danny Thomas Show, I used to get a lot of hate mail whenever Danny Thomas put his arm around Amanda Randolph's Baxter,
Right.
colored character actress, black character actress. And whenever he showed any physical affection for her, people would send in mail like, when I want to see a white man making love to a gorilla, I'll go to a freak show, and so on. Hate mail, hate mail. And I had saved it. I had saved this bad mail because I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I just represented the kind of idiocy that was prevalent at that time south of the Mason-Dixon line. People who would write 8 or 9 or 10 postcards, all in the same handwriting, all with the same postmark, all signed different names, so that one idiot would make himself sound like 10 idiots. I kept the mail. Then we did the episode in the Van Dyke Show in which Greg Morris was more intelligent, more reserved, and in other ways compared very favorably to Dick, who was convinced that his babies had gotten mixed up in the hospital. And when he called the man who he thought had their baby, said, "Come on here, we got to settle this thing." The guy came over the house and he saw that it was a black man, Greg Morris. Of course, he felt like an idiot and looked like an idiot. And I got mail on that too. Very, very favorable mail. Very refreshing to see a black man shown with dignity, etc.
It also gave you one of the biggest laughs
Yeah,
in the
great
history of the show.
So when I wanted to do I Spy and I wanted to use Bill Cosby in it, because he answered all the requirements I had, I knew that the man I wanted to play opposite Bob Culp had to be athletic, attractive, sense of humor, all of those qualities and others. And I saw it in Bill Cosby. But at that time, the networks were very apprehensive about using blacks on a level with whites, and he would have to be on a level. They would have to sleep in the same sort of accommodations, go out on dates and all that. And I knew that they would be very apprehensive about that, because they would be afraid that the southern stations would not carry it. They would defect from the network. So when I was going into New York, I took the favorable mail with me. And I enlisted the help of Mort Werner and Herb Schlosser, who were then doing programming for NBC. And I said, when we go up to see the president, Bob Kintner, the president of the network, I have to get his okay before I cast any of my principal characters in this. He'd already okayed Bob Culp. I said, you guys back me up and tell him how this mail here shows that the temperature of the country has changed in the intervening years. Oh, there's no longer such a bigoted attitude and so on. So they came up to Kintner's office with me. We went through the usual beginning routine of how are things going and how's your golf game and how's your coffee, you want it with cream or with that. And when we settled down, and Mr. Kintner said, how are you coming with the casting? And I said, well, you know, we've set Culp. You like him. He's okay, you said. He said, yeah, he's fine. Who else are you going to get? I said, well, I saw the guy I want. He said, did you sign him? I said, well, no. He said, why not? I said, because he's black. And he said, what difference does that make? Somewhere bells rang and trumpets blew. The whole history of television changed in that moment. Because all of a sudden the door was open. Well, not then, but subsequently, because of Cosby's acceptance. Not only his acceptance, but his very marked success, unprecedented. All of a sudden everybody wanted a black show. Between that time and the next season, the number of black shows, black-oriented shows, multiplied indescribably. Historic moment.
Yeah. Going back to the Van Dyke Show for a second, that was a very happy set, wasn't it?
All the sets, to the degree that I could bring it about, I did everything I could to make every set happy, because these people are going to spend more time together for the next 5, 6, 7 years with one another than they did with their own family. This was to be their family for the next 5, 6, 7 years. And unless they enjoyed the environment and the association, it's not going to be a healthy show. So I did the unprecedented thing of putting free coffee and free donuts on the set. Up until then, you were supposed to put a quarter in the pot every time you took a donut. But it worked out well.
Well, it also had to do with the temperament and personality of the lead people, you know, like Dick.
Oh, I would not have associated myself with anyone with whom I was not compatible. Yeah. I did just once, and I regretted it for years after.
What was your favorite episode of the Van Dyke Show? Did you have a favorite one?
The one with Max Calvada.
Oh, in which you starred, of course. All right. Why did the show end?
Why did the show end? Because Mary and Dick were being seduced by picture makers, by the major studios, who waived big contracts and big picture commitments in front of them, and they thought that they'd have a bigger and better career there than they were having in television.
Were you disappointed that it was over?
Same thing applied to Carl. Carl also wanted to get into the big screen stuff.
Yeah, I guess you were disappointed that it was over.
I was disappointed. I thought it was a big mistake. I thought that they could have written, if it was just money they wanted, they were at the point where they could have written their own ticket. Mm-hmm. The network and the sponsor were so eager to have them, they could have named any figure within reason. And their career seemed to be doing very well where they were. I didn't see any reason for them to go looking for another career elsewhere, but their managers felt otherwise.
Like the Andy Griffith Show, that show is considered one of the very best ever.
See what we're up against?
Yeah, I know. I'm going to cough too in a little while. You told me why you thought, you told us why you thought that Andy Griffith was as successful as it is now. The same holds true for the Dick Van Dyke Show. What do you think the popularity and the feeling about that show was that lets it sustain its degree of excellence to this day?
Well, aside from the excellence of the material they were given to do, the script material, which was excellent, superb. The personal charm of Mary and Dick is one of the greatest commodities that we've ever enjoyed in this business. They're personally two very charming, very delightful people, magnetic.
Yeah, you know, and I often say that the Dick Van Dyke Show, with all its great comedy, and the Danny Thomas Show, and Lucille Ball, and all of those other shows, they were basically love stories, which...
Oh, you have to, you have to like the people, or else you're going nowhere, which is the reason why the Don Rickles Show didn't make it. The concept of the Don Rickles Show, with which you were associated, was that we played Don as a sort of a Donald Duck, you know, quacking and but still harmless, you know, full of fury, but in sound and fury, but no substance. I said, it works with Donald Duck. You know, you like the little creature, the little animal anyway, don't you? That's true, but we couldn't get them to like Don.
Yeah. Let's now talk again about the wonderful show I Spy. How did you evolve? What was the creation before the inclusion of Bill Cosby? The idea itself.
Well, NBC did what Procter & Gamble had done some years earlier. They gave me a blank check. They said, whatever you want to do, we want to give you an on-the-air commitment for it. That you go on the air with it. Said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to get out of this thing of sound stages and walls. I said, television has outgrown that. The first television sets were limited by physical features so the Jack Webb technique of talking heads, you cut from close-up to close-up, because they had no space, they had no room, they couldn't handle bigger sets and bigger areas. And the screen, the television screen, 13-inch screen prevailed at the time, 11 inch, 13 inches. Well, by the time that my conversation with NBC occurred, we were up to 25-inch screens, and everything had expanded and developed. And I said, I'd like to get out of the studios. I'd like to show the world. I'd like to move around and let some air into television. That's basically what I wanted to do. Now the question became, if that's what I want to do, how do I do it? Well, I do it by getting a couple of people who travel around the world. Who travels around the world? Spies, professional athletes, various people. All right, I'll do a picture about a couple of professional athletes who are also happen to be spies. That's it. From that point on, it was merely a matter of finding who to do it with, because the concept was I was going to ramble around the world doing adventure stories about these two charming young men.
And the two writer producers you got to help you with that were
Friedkin and Fine.
Mort
Fine and David Friedkin.
Mort Fine and David Friedkin, yeah. You once remarked that I Spy's statement was that there was no statement. What did you mean by that?
I don't know. What did I mean by that?
Well, I don't know. We'll go to the next question.
No, I think what I must have meant was that in treating Cosby and disregarding the difference in color between the two, we were making a statement that there's no difference.
I thought that's what you meant.
Probably. I was more articulate then than I am now.
Was that your first show on NBC?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, how come you didn't? Well, I guess the CBS didn't offer you the same deal that NBC.
They didn't offer me a blank check.
Oh, sure. Well, what made I Spy such a... Well, I think you did. You talked about why different from your previous action shows is that it went all over the world, right?
Not only that, but I introduced an element of humor into each one. Their dialogue and their relationship often had a humorous aspect to it. The combination of humor and action is irresistible, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to do, to introduce a touch of something funny and whenever we could.
Bob Culp was a big help to Bill, who was not a trained actor at that point at all, wasn't he?
He was a big help to Bill, who was not a trained actor, but he was a pain in any part of the anatomy you choose for me.
I see. There's another gentleman connected with that show who was very influential. You and a man by the name of Fuad Saeed, who revolutionized the business in a way.
That's right.
What was that?
When the trade papers announced that I was going to make a picture on foreign locations, this young man sought an interview with me, and I came to my office one day. He was about 22 years old, 23 years old. So he was just fresh out of the cinema department at the University of Southern California. He wanted to do the location shooting of I Spy, wherever we went on location. I said, why? What's your background? He says, that's just it. You don't want a background. What are you talking about? He says, if you look for a background, you're going to get people who are doing the conventional way. They're going to travel with 4, 5, 6, 7 vehicles going wherever you go. You can't do it that way. You can't travel to European countries with all of the equipment that you use for making pictures. I said, no, I can hire it. I can rent it in Hong Kong or in Paris or wherever. He said, you'll get the stuff that's in the attic, the stuff that has to be maintained and repaired more than the time you get using it. I said, well, what do you propose? He said, I propose to design a vehicle that will take everything you want in one vehicle, the size of a small panel truck, a 40 Econoline panel truck. And you give you everything you want any place in the world. You can fly it any place. You put it in a cargo plane, they'll deliver it to you in Venice and St. Mark's Square in Venice, any place you want. Okay, and what do you have to do? I said, all I have to do is get the money for it. I said, well, suppose I give you the money for it. I'll lend you the money for it, which I did. I loaned him the money for it. He designed a vehicle called the Cinemobile, which was in fact a mobile studio. Carried generators, lights, sound, camera, everything you wanted in this one vehicle. It was very successful, and the making of I Spy enabled us to go places that people had never gone before. And later the studios wanted it. So he set up a company to rent it to the other studios. I don't want to draw the story out too long, only to tell you that now Fuad Saeed, the little 22-year-old graduate of the University of Southern California Cinema School, I spent the last summer on his 200-foot yacht in the Mediterranean.
So that's great. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure logistically doing I Spy in those locations presented a lot of problems, right?
Welcome problems. I enjoyed the problems. I enjoyed the problems because we always found a solution for them. It was a challenge, and it increased our self-confidence, and I think gave the pictures a fresh look.
Yeah. Well, can you give us a couple of your favorite stories about the production, the crowds in Hong Kong? You were in the crowds in Hong Kong, the Greece after the coup, you know, those.
It was remarkable. In places like Hong Kong, you see, blasé cities like Los Angeles and Paris and London, New York, you can set up a camera almost anywhere, and you get a few people who stick their heads in the camera, or otherwise show curiosity about what you're doing. But on the whole, people keep on walking in these major metropolitan centers. In the less sophisticated parts of the world where we chose to go, the setting up of a camera set is an event. It draws people like sugar draws flies. They come from every place. I remember one occasion in Hong Kong, we were shooting in a back alley at night. Well, night was one of the most difficult parts because when you lit up your lights and the lights reflected on the clouds, it was practically an advertisement that something was going on. The people came from all over. This particular night, we set up in a back alley, and of course, the crowd of a couple of hundred people with nothing else to do gathered around, and it started to rain. And the production manager said, we have to break. There's a restaurant. Let's go in there and wait until the rain stops. He said, it may stop in a half hour. So, well, it didn't stop for 2 hours. After 2 hours, it finally stopped. We said, well, now we can go out. Everything's soaked, but we'll go out there. Before we went in there, with a couple of hundred people who've been watching, we assumed it all dispersed. No, they were all still there. Every one of them still standing, drenched and shivering, waiting for us to resume shooting. You know, in Hong Kong, they use all sorts of devices in other ways. One time I put one of the cameramen in a big packing case, an enormous packing case, which we set up on Nathan Road in the morning and put him in it so that the crowds wouldn't see. He had the camera and the people, the crowds wouldn't see, and we could put Culp and Cosby in, they'd do what they wanted. Nobody would know that we were shooting film. The only trouble was that we overlooked the fact that in the tropical heat of midday Hong Kong, the guy had passed out in the crate. And the incidents like that were many of them, innumerable ones. Let's do another session sometime, and I'll tell you the whole story.
That was probably one of the most expensive shows you ever did to produce, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It was a deficit show, but fortunately, it had a good syndication value, and we recovered.
That only lasted 3 seasons. How come?
Well, that's a story. NBC, at the end of the 3rd season, they had a commitment to me. They had an obligation to me to put on another one show a year for me, guarantee me on the air space for 1 show a year. Well, it was coming up, and I wanted to put a show on the air called My Friend Tony with Enzo Chirusico and Jimmy Whitcomb. And they said, well, gee, we haven't got room for it. All of our spots, we simply haven't got room. The only place we can make room, we'd have to take I Spy off the air to make room for it. Well, for reasons that I don't want to go into it in great extent, I was perfectly willing to have I Spy taken off the air at that time because internally problems were developing, which meant that the quality of the show was inevitably decreasing and diminishing. And I knew that because of interpersonal relationships that were exerting themselves on the quality of the material, that it wasn't going to get better, it was only going to get worse. So I said, well, okay, if that's the only way that Tony can go on the air, okay, that's the way it'll have to be. So that's the way it was.
Yeah. So you did yeah, so that was, but its effect is a lasting effect on television and the people who were in it, certainly on Bill.
And black actors.
Yeah, which is great. You've done so many other shows, too. You mentioned My Friend Tony with Enzo Chirusico, and you had Gomer Pyle, certainly, with Jim Nabors, which was very successful. The Bill Dana Show. And
well, I had a few off the influence of the going a lot, too. I did the Real McCoys
That's right.
over at Selznick's lot for the Pincus brothers, and I did the Lassie show for 4 years. I exec produced that, and directed the first dozen or so of them, and several others.
And you did a show with me where we discovered a young lady named Goldie Hawn,
Yeah.
called Good Morning World. And you did a show, a lovely show, with Danny Arnold and Mel Shavelson called
Took more the one I like best.
Yeah, My
World
World.
Welcome to it, based on James Thurber's material.
That was a show that won an Emmy Award, and
Well, it was the best new comedy of the year, and it was canceled at the end of its first year because the network said it's too sophisticated. Well, Thurber was sophisticated in
Yes.
material, and they wrote satire, and they adhered to the ages-long belief that satire is what closes Thursday. That's it.
it was a beautiful show. The star of that was William Wyndham.
Bill Wyndham, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he was great. And in 1975, you returned to acting on television as the star of a series called
Yeah, we got off on the wrong foot, that series.
Big Eddie.
Yeah, we made the mistaken assumption that Damon Runyon was, the appeal of Damon Runyon's material was permanent. It was not. It was a vogue. There was a period in which Damon Runyon's material was, of course, very popular. But the generations that grew up after that period didn't understand it. They didn't understand the characters, like No-Nose Cone and Big Head Charlie and characters like that. What was inherent in the series and what we never developed was the fact that we had the combination of Big Eddie, who was, if not a hoodlum, he was a borderline. He associated with hoodlums, and he felt at home with hoodlums. And he belonged in that environment. He was married to an ex-stripper, a girl who used to be a stripper in burlesque.
Played by
And
Sherry
the girl,
North.
yeah, Sherry North.
Yeah.
And that she was going to school and taking classes now and beginning to develop not merely into a woman, but into an advanced and an activist kind of woman. That was what the show should have been about, not about the.
We were doing that,
presumably
and we
weird
just didn't have time to develop
We didn't
it.
have time to develop.
Well, that was one of the situations where the first 3 weeks we were a big hit because we were in one time slot. Then they switched us to 8 o'clock Friday night opposite Sanford and Son, and that killed it. Which is, time period is very important in television.
Critical.
Yeah.
Critical.
It's the most critical thing.
If they don't find you, they can't like you.
That's exactly right. We're going to have another change of tape.
Well,
And-
let's go have lunch.
I buy that in a second. Did you hear what I said?
Yeah.
I buy that? Oh, my God. Okay, let's do that.